I walked through the revolving glass doors of Aureon Health Systems at exactly 2 p.m. on Valentine's Day. I was wearing a tailored wool trench coat against the bitter Connecticut winter chill. In my right hand, I held a massive bouquet of deep red Baccara roses. In my left, I held a heavy, cream-colored envelope containing 2 first-class tickets to Paris. It was a grand, romantic gesture, the kind of gesture I hadn't made in years. For the last 14 years, my husband, Adrian, and I had been building Aureon. Well, practically speaking, I had built it. I was the data architect. I had written the original code that allowed the software to seamlessly integrate massive healthcare databases. And more importantly, my late father had provided the initial $5 million seed capital through our private holding company, Bennett Family Holdings. But I had never liked the spotlight. I preferred the quiet precision of architecture and the anonymity of the background. So I let Adrian be the face. He was incredibly charismatic, handsome, and comfortable on stage. Over the years, the narrative naturally shifted. The business magazine started calling him the visionary founder. The new hires didn't even know my name. To the outside world, I was just the quiet wife who stayed at our home in Westport. I had convinced myself that stepping back was a sacrifice for my marriage. I thought that by letting him have the glory, I was keeping us strong. I walked up to the sleek minimalist reception desk in the massive, sunlit lobby. The young receptionist, who looked like she had graduated college 3 months ago, barely glanced up from her monitor. "Hi," I said softly, resting the roses on the edge of the desk. "I'm here to see Adrian Shaw." The receptionist clicked a button on her keyboard, her expression bored. "Do you have an appointment? Mr. Shaw is the founder. He doesn't take unscheduled walk-ins." I smiled a little sadly. 14 years ago, I had signed the commercial lease for this exact building. Now, the receptionist was treating me like a cold-calling vendor. "I don't have an appointment," I admitted. "I'm his wife, Claire." The receptionist paused. She looked at me, a brief flicker of confusion crossing her face. But she quickly masked it with professional politeness. "Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure she believed me. "But Mr. Shaw isn't in his office right now. Nobody is. They're all in the central atrium." She pointed toward the massive glass double doors that led to the core of the building. "They're just getting started," she added, turning back to her screen. I thanked her and walked toward the atrium. I assumed it was a Valentine's Day corporate mixer. Adrian loved hosting office parties. He believed it boosted morale and reinforced his image as the benevolent leader. I pushed through the glass doors. The atrium was packed. Nearly 200 employees were gathered in a wide circle, holding glasses of champagne. The atmosphere was buzzing with electric, suppressed excitement. I stood at the back of the crowd, partially hidden by a large decorative column. In the center of the room, standing on a slightly elevated presentation platform, was my husband. Adrian looked magnificent. He was wearing a sharp, modern gray suit without a tie, exuding the casual, effortless authority that had made him a darling of the tech press. Standing opposite him was Vanessa Moreau. Vanessa was 36, brilliant, and stunningly beautiful. Adrian had hired her 18 months ago to take over the daily operations as the official CEO, allowing him to transition into a pure founder-chairman role. I had met her exactly twice. She seemed competent and fiercely driven. I assumed Adrian was presenting her with a corporate award, or perhaps announcing a major acquisition. Then, Adrian reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. The room went dead silent. A few employees near the front pulled out their phones, hitting record. Adrian didn't pull out a plaque or a contract. He pulled out a small, square velvet box. My heart completely stopped. The air vanished from my lungs. Adrian dropped to one knee on the presentation platform. A collective, massive gasp rippled through the 200 employees. Several women screamed in delight. "Vanessa!" Adrian's voice boomed across the atrium, amplified by a wireless microphone. His tone was thick with emotion, perfectly modulated for the crowd. 18 months ago, you walked into this company and changed the trajectory of Aureon forever. But more importantly, you changed the trajectory of my life. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was completely, physically paralyzed, anchored to the marble floor by the sheer, incomprehensible scale of the betrayal. "You are the smartest, most beautiful, most extraordinary woman I have ever known," Adrian continued, opening the velvet box. The massive diamond caught the sunlight pouring through the skylight. It was an emerald-cut diamond set in platinum, the exact style I had once told him I loved, back when we were broke and dreaming. "Will you marry me?" Adrian asked. Vanessa burst into tears. She covered her mouth with both hands, nodding frantically. "Yes!" Vanessa cried into the microphone. "Yes, of course, yes!" The atrium absolutely erupted. 200 employees cheered, whistled, and applauded. Confetti cannons suddenly popped from the second-floor balcony, raining gold and white paper over the newly engaged couple. Adrian stood up, pulled Vanessa into his arms, and kissed her deeply, to the roaring approval of the crowd. I stood in the shadows of the column, holding the red roses and the tickets to Paris. I didn't drop them. I didn't scream. I didn't march onto the stage and slap him. My brain, trained to analyze complex data structures and find logical pathways through chaos, rapidly processed the scene in front of me. Adrian wasn't just having an affair. An affair happened in a hotel room. An affair happened in the dark. This was a corporate event. 200 people were clapping, which meant 200 people had accepted this reality. I looked closely at Vanessa as she hugged the chief financial officer. She didn't look like a mistress hiding a dirty secret. She looked like a woman who genuinely believed she was stepping into a legitimate, clean future. She didn't know I existed. Or, more accurately, she didn't know I was still his wife. Adrian must have told her, and the entire executive team, that we were divorced or entirely separated. He had systematically erased my existence from the company I had built, replacing me so thoroughly that he felt comfortable proposing to another woman in my own building. I looked at my husband, laughing and shaking hands with the VP of engineering. He had stolen my code. He had stolen my father's money. He had stolen my youth. And now, he was stealing my dignity in front of an audience. The profound, agonizing heartbreak I felt for the first 30 seconds suddenly, violently evaporated. In its place, a terrifying, absolute clarity settled over my mind. I turned around. I walked back through the glass doors, through the lobby, and out into the freezing Connecticut air. I walked to my car, a sensible, understated Volvo. I unlocked the door, sat in the driver's seat, and placed the roses and the Paris tickets on the passenger seat. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call a therapist. I dialed Malcolm Price. Malcolm was 61 years old. He had been the lead attorney for my father's estate for 3 decades, and he managed all the legal structures for Bennett family holdings. He was a man who spoke softly but carried an incredibly heavy legal hammer. "Claire." Malcolm answered on the second ring, his voice warm. "Happy Valentine's Day. Did Adrian like the tickets?" "Malcolm," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "I need you to execute a full capital withdrawal from Aureon Health Systems. Immediately." There was a long, sharp silence on the line. The warmth in Malcolm's voice vanished, replaced by instant, razor-sharp focus. "Claire," Malcolm said carefully, "a full capital withdrawal. That will freeze their primary credit facility. It will halt their pending acquisitions. It will effectively blindside the board." What happened? "Adrian just proposed to Vanessa Moreau in the company Atrium," I stated clinically, "in front of 200 employees. He has clearly represented himself as unmarried to the entire executive team." Malcolm let out a slow, heavy breath. "I see. I also need you to freeze all joint personal accounts requiring mutual review," I continued, staring at the brick facade of the building I technically owned. "And Malcolm, I need you to draft a formal notification to Graham Ellery, the chairman of the board. Inform him that the beneficial owner of 83% of Aureon Health Systems is officially revoking her silent status." "It will be done within the hour," Malcolm promised, his voice hard. "Go home, Claire. Do not answer his calls." I hung up. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot. I drove back to the massive, quiet house in Westport. The house was empty, save for Bailey, my 12-year-old golden retriever. Bailey slowly walked over, his tail wagging lazily, and pressed his graying muzzle against my knee. I sat down on the hardwood floor of the foyer, buried my face in Bailey's soft fur, and finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for the 14 years I had spent loving a ghost. I cried for the woman I had been. The woman who thought staying in the shadows was an act of love. Exactly 32 minutes later, my phone began to ring. It was Adrian. I watched the screen light up. I didn't answer. It rang again, and again, and again. Within an hour, I had 152 missed calls. I had 47 frantic text messages. Claire, pick up the phone. Claire, what the hell did your lawyer just do to the corporate accounts? Claire, the board just called an emergency session. Call me back right now. Not a single text asked how I was. Not a single text apologized. He wasn't panicking because he realized I had caught him cheating. He didn't even know I had been at the office. He was panicking because the money had suddenly stopped. For the first time in his life, the invisible safety net he had been walking on had simply vanished, leaving him suspended over a massive, terrifying drop. 2 hours later, the sound of tires screeching in the driveway broke the silence of the house. A car door slammed. Heavy footsteps pounded up the front steps. The doorbell rang frantically, accompanied by furious pounding on the heavy oak door. Claire! Adrian shouted from the porch. Claire, open the door! I stood up slowly. I smoothed down my skirt. I walked to the door and pulled it open. Adrian stood on the porch, his face pale, his tie completely undone. The charismatic, effortless CEO from the atrium was gone. He looked terrified and furious. What did you do? Adrian demanded, pushing past me into the foyer. Malcolm Price just froze the operational credit lines. The bank just called the CFO. Graham Ellery called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning and suspended my executive access. Hello, Adrian, I said softly, closing the door behind him. Did Vanessa like the ring? I always thought emerald cut was very elegant. Adrian froze. All the blood drained from his face. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. You, he choked out, his eyes wide. You were there? I brought you tickets to Paris, I replied, gesturing vaguely toward the kitchen counter. I was standing by the pillar. The confetti was a nice touch. Very cinematic. Claire, listen to me, Adrian stammered, his hands coming up in a placating gesture. The rage instantly evaporated, replaced by desperate, scrambling panic. It's not what it looks like. You don't understand the corporate dynamics. I had to secure her loyalty. She's critical to the upcoming IPO. It was just a strategic move. It's just optics. I stared at him, genuinely repulsed. He was actually trying to frame a marriage proposal to his mistress as a corporate retention strategy. You told her we were divorced, didn't you? I asked quietly. You told the entire executive team that I was just an ex-wife who lived in the suburbs. You erased me. I protected you, Adrian argued loudly, his narcissism blinding him to his own absurdity. I kept you out of the stressful corporate politics. I took all the pressure. I built that company, Claire. I am the founder. You can't just call a lawyer and freeze my credit lines. You have legal obligations as a minority shareholder. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. He had said it so many times, on stage, on podcasts, and in magazines that he had actually begun to believe his own lie. He had completely forgotten the foundational architecture of his own life. Adrian, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying surgical calmness. You are not the founder. You are an employee. I am the CEO, he yelled, his face turning red. My name is on the building. Your name is on the business cards, I corrected him. But Bennett Family Holdings owns 80% of the voting shares. My father funded the seed capital. I wrote the core intellectual property. You own exactly 12% of the company, and 5% of that is unvested equity. I took a step closer to him. He physically recoiled, finally sensing the absolute, cold danger radiating from me. You spent 14 years standing on my stage, playing the visionary, I whispered, the truth finally cutting through the silence of our marriage. And you got so used to the applause that you forgot who built the theater. The company was never yours, Adrian. I just let you stand in front of it. I walked past him and opened the front door. The emergency board meeting is tomorrow at 9 a.m., I told him. You should probably go prepare. I hear the chairman has some very difficult questions for you. At 8:55 a.m. the next morning, I sat at the massive oak dining table in my Westport home. My laptop was open. Malcolm Price sat in the chair next to me, meticulously reviewing a stack of corporate bylaws. At exactly 9 a.m., I clicked the link to join the emergency board meeting of Aureon Health Systems. The digital grid populated with the faces of the board members. Graham Ellery, the chairman, looked deeply stressed, sitting in his Wall Street office. Nora Whitfield, the sharpest venture capitalist on our board, looked furious. The general counsel, the chief financial officer, and Adrian were also on the call. Adrian was broadcasting from the study of a high-end hotel. He had not returned to our house the previous night. He looked exhausted, but he had managed to arrange his lighting to project a somber, authoritative look. He was still trying to control the optics. "Good morning," Graham began, his voice tight. "I am calling this emergency session to address the sudden unauthorized capital withdrawal initiated by Bennett Family Holdings. Adrian, as the CEO, you assured this board that the credit lines were secure ahead of our planned acquisition of MedData Corp. We are now completely frozen." Adrian cleared his throat, adjusting his posture. "Graham, this is a minor, temporary domestic dispute. My wife is going through a difficult emotional period. She overreacted to an internal corporate event. I am handling it privately. The capital will be restored by Monday." "He's lying," I stated calmly, unmuting my microphone. Every face on the screen, except Malcolm's, snapped toward my video feed in shock. They hadn't realized I was on the call. Most of them had never even heard my voice in a professional setting. "Claire?" Graham asked, completely bewildered. "What are you doing on an executive board call?" "I am attending in my capacity as the beneficial owner of 83% of the voting shares of Aureon Health Systems," I replied smoothly. "And I am formally informing this board that the capital withdrawal is permanent. I will not authorize the MedData acquisition." Nora Whitfield leaned closer to her webcam, her eyes narrowing. 83%. Adrian, you explicitly told this board that you controlled the founder's equity. You said your wife held a minor, non-voting spousal interest. "Adrian lied to you, Nora," Malcolm interjected, his deep, authoritative voice cutting through the digital static. "Bennett Family Holdings holds the controlling interest. Adrian Shaw is an employee with a 12% minority stake. He has no authority to pledge the company's capital, and he certainly has no authority to reassure this board regarding my client's financial decisions." Adrian's face turned ash gray. His carefully constructed corporate persona was unraveling in real time. "Adrian," Nora said, ignoring him and focusing directly on the governance issue. "Why did your wife initiate a massive capital freeze?" "Because," I answered before he could spin another lie. "Yesterday afternoon, Adrian hosted a company-wide Valentine's Day event in the atrium. During this event, he publicly proposed marriage to Vanessa Moreau, our chief executive officer." The silence on the conference call was deafening. Graham Ellery took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, looking like he was developing a sudden, massive migraine. "You proposed to the CEO?" Graham asked, his voice dangerously low. "A CEO you personally recruited and hired 18 months ago, without disclosing the relationship to the board." "Graham, it's not a conflict of interest." Adrian scrambled, panic finally bleeding into his voice. "Vanessa and I have a firewall between our departments. It's a modern relationship. The employees loved it. It showed unity at the top." Nora Whitfield wasn't buying the emotional spin. She was a ruthless corporate governance hawk. "Adrian," Nora interrupted, her voice like cracking ice. "Did you represent yourself to Vanessa Moreau and to the executive team of this company as an unmarried man?" Adrian froze. He looked at the camera, then looked away. He couldn't answer the question without admitting to massive ethical fraud. "Did you, or did you not, conceal your marital status from the officers of this company's to facilitate a romantic relationship with a direct subordinate?" Nora demanded, refusing to let him breathe. "I told them we were separated." Adrian snapped defensively, instantly realizing he had just confessed. "We practically were. Claire hasn't been to the office in years. She's a silent partner. It's my face on the magazine covers. I built the culture. You built a massive liability, the general counsel interjected, speaking for the first time. He sounded terrified. Mr. Chairman, the CEO and the founder are engaged in an undisclosed relationship while publicly executing a marriage proposal on company property. The sexual harassment liability, the conflict of interest, and the breach of fiduciary duty are astronomical. Graham Ellery didn't hesitate. He was a survivor. Adrian, Graham ordered, you are hereby placed on immediate, indefinite administrative leave, pending a full independent investigation. You are to surrender all company devices. Security will deactivate your executive access card within the next 10 minutes. You are not to contact Vanessa Moreau, any member of the executive team, or the press. You can't suspend me, Adrian shouted, slamming his fist on his desk. I am the visionary of this company. You need me for the IPO roadshow. We don't have an IPO roadshow anymore. Adrian, Graham replied coldly, because the majority shareholder just pulled our funding. We are adjourned. The screens went black. I closed my laptop. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt a profound, exhausting sadness. I had watched the man I loved destroy his own life in less than 20 minutes. Malcolm gently closed his legal pad. It's done, Claire. They've cut him out. Now we can begin the quiet process of divorce and untangling the assets. I don't want to destroy the company, Malcolm, I whispered, staring at the blank screen. I just wanted to stop the lie. You did, Malcolm assured me. The truth is out. But we were wrong. The truth hadn't even begun to surface. 2 hours later, my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown Connecticut number. I answered it. Hello, Claire? A hesitant, shaking voice asked. I recognized the voice immediately. It was Vanessa Moreau. My immediate instinct was to hang up. I didn't want to hear the other woman apologize. I didn't want to hear her beg for her job or explain how much she loved my husband. Please don't hang up, Vanessa pleaded, her voice cracking. I am so incredibly sorry. I had to call you. I had to tell you that I didn't know. You didn't know he was married, I asked, my tone guarded but not overtly hostile. He told me you separated 2 years ago, Vanessa said, crying softly into the phone. He said you were living in Westport, and he had moved into an apartment downtown. He said the divorce was just tied up in corporate paperwork because of the original founder's agreement. I swear to God, Claire, if I had known he was still living with you, if I had known he was still married, I never would have touched him. I have a career. I have a reputation. I would never have let him propose to me in front of the entire company. I listened to the genuine, absolute devastation in her voice. She wasn't a malicious homewrecker trying to steal a billionaire's life. She was a 36-year-old executive who had been systematically, professionally, and romantically manipulated by a sociopath. He told you he lived in a downtown apartment? I asked, a strange detail catching my attention. Yes, Vanessa sniffled. He even showed me the lease agreement when we first started dating. He wanted to prove that he had officially moved out of the Westport house. The lease was in his name. It's a penthouse in Stamford. I frowned, my architectural, data-driven mind instantly flagging an anomaly. Adrian didn't live in a penthouse in Stamford. He came home to Westport every single night. He complained about the commute. He ate dinner with me. He slept in my bed. So why did he have a lease for a downtown penthouse? Vanessa, I said softly, did you ever go to that apartment? No, she admitted. He always said it was too small and messy, so we either stayed at my place or went to hotels. He said it was just a temporary bachelor pad until the divorce was finalized. Thank you for calling me, Vanessa, I said sincerely. I appreciate it, and I believe you. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt the cold, sharp instinct of a developer hunting a bug in the code. I walked into Adrian's home office. I didn't tear the room apart. I systematically opened his filing cabinets, searching for the personal financial records we kept separate from the corporate holding company. I didn't find a lease for a Stamford penthouse, but I found something else. I found a stack of heavily redacted corporate expense reports, neatly filed in a locked drawer. I pulled them out and spread them across his desk. Adrian was a minority shareholder and an employee of Aureon. According to our corporate bylaws, Any personal expense over $10,000 billed to the company required the countersignature of the majority shareholder, me, to ensure there was no commingling of funds. I looked at the first expense report. It was an authorization for a corporate luxury apartment in Stamford, Connecticut, leased for $12,000 a month. The stated business purpose: strategic client hospitality suite. At the bottom of the authorization, on the line designated for the majority shareholder, was a signature. Claire Bennett Shaw. I stared at the signature. It looked exactly like my handwriting. The loops, the pressure, the specific slant of the B. It was flawless, but I had never seen this document in my life. I had never authorized a hospitality suite in Stamford. I picked up the second expense report. It was an authorization for a $65,000 purchase from a high-end jeweler in New York. The stated business purpose: investor relations gifts. Diamond retainer program again. At the bottom of the page, my flawless signature stared back at me. $65,000. An emerald-cut diamond ring set in platinum. The ring he had used to propose to Vanessa in the atrium. He hadn't just bought it with company money. He had forged my signature to authorize the purchase of his mistress's engagement ring. My hands began to shake, not from heartbreak, but from the sheer, terrifying realization of the massive legal liability Adrian had just exposed me to. I picked up my phone and called Malcolm Price again. "Malcolm," I said, my voice vibrating with suppressed adrenaline. "You need to come back to the house. Right now." "Claire, what's wrong?" Malcolm asked, instantly catching the alarm in my voice. "Adrian didn't just have an affair," I breathed, looking at a third expense report detailing a private jet charter to the Maldives, authorized by my forged signature. He has been forging my signature on corporate documents to fund a shadow life. 30 minutes later, Malcolm stood over Adrian's desk wearing a pair of reading glasses, intensely scrutinizing the stack of expense reports. "These are good forgeries, Claire," Malcolm noted grimly, holding a document up to the light. "Incredibly good. If the IRS or the SEC audited the company, they would absolutely assume you personally authorized these expenditures." By signing these, he legally implicated Bennett family holdings in corporate embezzlement. "It's an apartment to build a fake alibi," I explained, pointing to the lease. "It's a diamond ring for Vanessa. It's private flights for romantic vacations." He categorized all of it as corporate expenses and used my name to bypass the CFO's oversight. Malcolm dropped the document back onto the desk. He looked at me, the experienced family lawyer transforming instantly into a ruthless corporate litigator. "This changes everything," Malcolm stated. "An affair is a domestic issue. Forging the majority shareholder's signature to misappropriate corporate funds is a federal crime. It's felony fraud. And more importantly, it gives the board the legal ammunition they need to execute a termination for cause." "Termination for cause," I repeated, understanding the implication. If Adrian was fired normally, or simply asked to resign, he would walk away with his vested equity, a massive golden parachute, and his unvested shares might even accelerate. He would leave a multimillionaire. But if a CEO is terminated for cause, specifically for fraud and embezzlement, the company has the legal right to strip him of his unvested equity, void his severance package, and pursue civil recovery for the stolen funds. "We need proof," Malcolm said, pulling out his phone. "Proof that it wasn't a one-time mistake. We need to prove a systemic pattern of fraud. I'm calling Diana Lyle." "Who is Diana Lyle?" I asked. "She is the most ruthless forensic accountant in New York," Malcolm replied, dialing the number. "She specializes in uncovering corporate executive fraud. She doesn't care about the gossip. She just follows the paper." 2 days later, on a quiet Sunday morning, a team of 4 forensic accountants, led by Diana Lyle, arrived at the Aureon Health Systems headquarters. Diana was a 47-year-old woman who wore sharp, perfectly tailored suits and possessed the cold, mechanical precision of a surgeon. She didn't offer me platitudes about my marriage. She simply shook my hand, asked for my master access codes, and walked into a secure conference room. The investigation was supposed to take a week. It took Diana exactly 14 hours. At 11 p.m. on Sunday night, Diana called Malcolm and me into the secure conference room. The large whiteboard at the front of the room was covered in a massive, interconnected web of dates, wire transfers, and document authorization numbers. "It's a system," Diana announced flatly, clicking a laser pointer onto the whiteboard. "He didn't just forge your signature on a few expense reports, Claire. He created an automated digital overlay using an old wet ink signature from a 2018 corporate tax filing." She projected a massive digital slide onto the screen. It was a metadata log. "Metadata does not have context," Diana explained, her voice entirely devoid of emotion. "It has timestamps. Every time your signature was applied to a document requiring majority shareholder approval, the metadata proves the document was originated, modified, and finalized from the specific IP address assigned to Adrian Shaw's executive desktop." I stared at the screen. "Over the last 4 years," Diana continued, highlighting a column of staggering numbers, "Adrian Shaw utilized this forged digital signature to authorize $3.2 million in fraudulent corporate expenses. This includes the Stamford penthouse, extensive private travel, luxury goods, and an unauthorized executive loan he used to pay down personal gambling debts. He hadn't just erased me from the company. He had actively used my identity to steal from the empire my father had funded." "He's a thief," Malcolm whispered, staring at the whiteboard in disgust. "He's worse than a thief," Diana corrected him, adjusting her glasses. "He's arrogant. He assumed that because Claire was a silent partner, nobody would ever ask her to verify the signatures. He thought he owned the company, so he treated the corporate treasury like a personal ATM." I looked at the digital logs. $3.2 million. For 14 years, I had stayed at home in Westport, believing I was giving my husband the space he needed to be a brilliant founder. I had trusted him completely. And while I was walking the dog and waiting for him to come home from late meetings, he was sitting at his desk, applying my forged signature to a document that funded his secret life with another woman. "Diana," I asked softly, my voice perfectly steady, "is the evidence incontrovertible?" "It is mathematically absolute," Diana confirmed. "I can present this to the board tomorrow morning, and they will have no choice but to act." "Malcolm," I said, turning to my lawyer, "call Graham Ellery. Tell him the independent investigation is complete. Tell him to convene a formal disciplinary hearing for Adrian Shaw tomorrow at 2 p.m. I walked out of the conference room and stood in the dark, empty atrium of Aureon Health Systems. I looked at the exact spot where Adrian had dropped to his knee to propose to Vanessa amidst a shower of confetti. He wanted to be the visionary founder. He wanted the spotlight. He wanted the entire company to watch him win. Tomorrow afternoon, the entire company was going to watch him burn. At exactly 1:55 p.m. on Monday, I logged into the secured virtual boardroom of Aureon Health Systems. Malcolm Price sat beside me. Diana Lyle, the forensic accountant, was logged in from her New York office. The entire executive board, including Graham Ellery and Nora Whitfield, was present. At 2 p.m., the digital waiting room pinged. Graham admitted Adrian to the call. Adrian looked awful. He hadn't shaved. He was wearing a dark sweater instead of his usual tailored suit. The arrogance that usually radiated from him had been entirely replaced by a desperate, cornered anxiety. He knew he was walking into a disciplinary hearing, but he still thought he was only defending an office affair. "Adrian," Graham Ellery began, his voice completely devoid of the warmth he usually reserved for his CEO. "You have been called before this board to address the findings of an expedited independent investigation." Adrian leaned forward, instantly slipping into his defensive corporate persona. "Graham, I know the optics of the Valentine's Day event were poor," Adrian started, speaking rapidly, "and I acknowledge that failing to disclose my relationship with Vanessa was a breach of protocol. But I am the founder of this company. I built this culture. You cannot terminate me over a lapse in personal judgment. I will issue a public apology. I will step back from the board for 6 months, and we can move forward." Nora Whitfield cut him off. "This hearing is not about your affair, Adrian." Adrian stopped talking. A deep, visible confusion crossed his face. He looked at Graham, then at me. Mrs. Lyle, Graham said, turning the floor over to the forensic accountant. Please proceed. Diana Lyle didn't introduce herself. She didn't offer pleasantries. She simply shared her screen, projecting the massive metadata log and the digital signature overlay directly into the boardroom. Mr. Shaw, Diana stated, her voice as sharp and cold as a scalpel. Over the past 4 years, you utilized a forged digital replica of the majority shareholder's signature to authorize 247 restricted corporate expense reports. Adrian's eyes widened in sheer, absolute panic. He stared at the screen, the color draining completely from his face. These forged authorizations, Diana continued relentlessly, were used to bypass the chief financial officer's oversight and misappropriate $3.2 million in corporate treasury funds. These funds were diverted to finance a luxury penthouse lease in Stamford, extensive private travel, and exorbitant personal jewelry purchases, including a $65,000 engagement ring, billed to the company as an investor relations gift. That's not what happened. Adrian stammered, his voice cracking. He looked at the board members, his eyes wide and frantic. You're taking it out of context. It's a misunderstanding of the corporate allocation structure. I was using that apartment for client meetings. I had verbal authorization from Claire. Metadata does not have context, Mr. Shaw, Diana interrupted smoothly, highlighting a specific timestamp on the screen. It has timestamps. The digital overlay of Claire Bennett Shaw's signature was applied to these documents from the exact IP address assigned to your primary executive workstation. In many instances, the physical security logs show you were the only person in the executive suite when the authorizations were generated. Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came out. The physical evidence was absolute, undeniable, and utterly damning. He realized he was trapped. He wasn't going to get a public apology. He wasn't going to get a 6-month sabbatical. He was going to be destroyed. He turned his gaze to the digital square on the screen containing my video feed. The panic in his eyes slowly hardened into a bitter, toxic resentment. He had been caught, and instead of feeling remorse, he was furious that I was the one who had finally turned the lights on. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Adrian sneered, his voice dripping with venom. You finally get to punish me for being the one who actually had the guts to build this company while you hid in Westport. Malcolm Price leaned forward, ready to legally decimate him, but I raised my hand, stopping my lawyer. I looked directly into the camera. I looked at the man I had loved for 14 years, the man I had defended, funded, and supported while he systematically erased me from his life and stole from my father's legacy. I am not enjoying this, Adrian, I replied, my voice quiet, steady, and echoing with profound finality. I am surviving it. I spent 14 years letting you stand on my stage because I thought you loved the company as much as I did. But you didn't love the company. You just loved the applause. Adrian stared at me. For the first time in his entire life, he had absolutely nothing to say. Graham Ellery cleared his throat, taking control of the hearing. Adrian Shaw, Graham announced, reading from a prepared legal document. Based on the incontrovertible evidence of corporate fraud, forgery, and the misappropriation of $3.2 million in company funds, this board has voted unanimously to terminate your employment at Aureon Health Systems, effective immediately. Adrian flinched as if he had been physically struck. Furthermore, Graham continued, delivering the fatal corporate blow. Because this termination is executed for cause, all of your unvested equity in Aureon Health Systems is hereby revoked and returned to the corporate treasury. Your severance package is voided. You are legally barred from entering any Aureon property, and the company will immediately initiate civil litigation to recover the stolen funds. You can't take my equity, Adrian whispered, his voice trembling. I built this company. I am the founder. You are an employee, Adrian. Nora Whitfield corrected him coldly. And you are fired. Do not contact any member of this board again. Graham Ellery severed Adrian's connection. Adrian's digital square vanished from the screen, leaving nothing but black space. He was gone. In less than 20 minutes, the visionary founder had been stripped of his title, his company, his unvested fortune, and his entire professional identity. "Claire," Graham said, turning his attention to me, his tone shifting to one of deep, respectful caution. "I apologize on behalf of this entire board. We failed in our oversight duties. We allowed this to happen under our watch. We will discuss corporate restructuring next week." "Graham," I replied softly. "Thank you for acting swiftly." I closed the laptop. The Westport house was completely silent, save for the soft sound of Bailey breathing in the corner. It was over. The lie had been surgically excised, but there was still one piece of the wreckage I needed to address. 2 days later, I drove to a small, quiet coffee shop in Fairfield, 30 minutes away from the corporate headquarters. I walked in and found Vanessa Moreau sitting in a booth by the window. She was wearing a simple bold Schwesser sweater, looking pale and deeply exhausted. The confident, brilliant CEO I had seen on the Atrium stage was completely gone, replaced by a woman trying to process the sudden, violent implosion of her life. I slid into the booth across from her. Vanessa looked down at her hands. The massive emerald-cut diamond ring was gone. "Thank you for meeting me, Claire," Vanessa said quietly. "I know you have absolutely no reason to speak to me." "I wanted to hear your side of the story, Vanessa," I replied, ordering a black coffee from the waitress. "The board is conducting a formal ethics review regarding your position as CEO. Before I make a decision on how Bennett Family Holdings will vote, I need to know exactly what Adrian told you." Vanessa took a deep breath, fighting back tears. "He told me you separated 2 years before he hired me," Vanessa explained, her voice shaking slightly. "He said you hated the corporate lifestyle and had permanently retreated to the suburbs. He showed me the Stamford penthouse lease as proof he had moved out. He introduced me to the executive team as his partner. He even took me to investor dinners. Claire, he was so completely, utterly convincing. I never saw a single red flag because he never hid me. He flaunted our relationship. I listened to her. My forensic mind, trained to detect lies, found nothing but genuine, devastated truth in her words. He flaunted it because he believed his own lie," I said softly. "He believed that because he controlled the narrative at the office, the reality in Westport didn't matter. He thought he was untouchable." Vanessa looked up at me, wiping a tear from her cheek. "When the board suspended him and then fired him for cause," Vanessa whispered, "he called me. He told me it was a conspiracy. He told me you were a vindictive ex-wife, trying to steal the company from him because you were jealous of our engagement." "And what did you say?" I asked. "I asked him why the engagement ring was paid for by a forged corporate expense report," Vanessa replied, a flash of cold, hard anger cutting through her tears. "He hung up on me." I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my coffee. She wasn't a villain. She wasn't an arrogant mistress who thought she had won a prize. She was an intelligent, ambitious woman who had been expertly manipulated by a corporate sociopath. She had fallen in love with a visionary founder, only to discover she was engaged to a federal fraudster. "He lied to both of us, Vanessa," I said quietly, looking out the window at the freezing Connecticut rain. "He used you to build his ego at work, and he used me to fund it. But he married me. The burden of this betrayal doesn't belong to you. It belongs entirely to him." Vanessa stared at me, clearly shocked by my lack of hostility. "Claire, I am so sorry." "I know," I said, offering her a small, genuine smile. "Go home, Vanessa. The board will contact you regarding your reinstatement." I stood up and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her sitting in the booth. I didn't forgive Adrian, but I wasn't going to let his betrayal turn me into a bitter, vindictive woman who destroyed other women just to feel powerful. Vanessa Moreau was a victim of the same man who had victimized me. That evening, I was sitting in the living room of the Westport house, reading a book by the fireplace, when I heard a soft, hesitant sound at the front door. It wasn't the frantic, aggressive pounding from Valentine's Day. It was a single, quiet knock. Bailey let out a low woof, walking slowly toward the foyer. I put my book down. I walked to the door and opened it, keeping the heavy brass security chain engaged. Adrian stood on the porch in the freezing rain. He looked completely broken. The expensive haircut was ruined. His clothes were wrinkled, and his shoulders were slumped in absolute defeat. He had lost his company. He had lost his unvested millions. He had lost his young, beautiful fiancée. He was finally completely empty. "Claire," Adrian whispered, his voice cracking. He looked at me through the narrow gap in the door, his eyes filled with genuine, desperate tears. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry for everything." I looked at the man I had given my entire adult life to. "Are you?" I asked softly. "Yes," Adrian sobbed, stepping closer to the door. "I lost my way, Claire. The magazines, the interviews, the money. I got addicted to the spotlight. I started believing my own hype. I forgot that you were the one who made it all possible. I forgot how much I loved you. Please, Claire, I have nothing left. Let me come home. We can fix this." It was the most emotional, vulnerable apology he had ever given me in 14 years. And it meant absolutely nothing. "Adrian," I said, my voice gentle but completely detached, "are you sorry because you hurt me? Or are you sorry because you got caught and your life collapsed?" Adrian opened his mouth to answer, but he froze. He looked into my eyes, searching for the unconditional, forgiving love that had always been there to catch him when he fell. He didn't find it. He realized, in that exact moment, that he couldn't lie his way out of this. He couldn't charm his way back into the Westport house, and he couldn't spin a narrative to get his company back. "I don't know anymore," Adrian admitted, his voice barely a whisper, the absolute, devastating truth finally breaking through his narcissism. "I know," I replied softly. I gently closed the heavy oak door. I didn't slam it. I didn't lock it with a furious, aggressive click. I just closed it quietly, shutting the cold rain and the broken man out of my house forever. 3 months later, I sat in the austere, glass-walled conference room of Malcolm Price's downtown law firm. We were there for the civil restitution mediation. The criminal fraud investigation was still pending with the federal authorities, but the corporate board of Aureon Health Systems had authorized Malcolm to aggressively pursue the immediate recovery of the $3.2 million Adrian had stolen. Adrian walked into the conference room accompanied by a low-tier defense attorney. He looked significantly older. The stress of the termination, the freezing of his bank accounts, the relentless media scrutiny, and the looming threat of federal indictment had stripped away the last remnants of his charismatic glow. The sharp, visionary CEO was completely gone. He was wearing an off-the-rack suit that didn't quite fit him right, and he carried a battered leather briefcase. He sat down across from me, refusing to meet my eyes. He looked at his hands, which were trembling slightly. "Mr. Price," Adrian's attorney began, clearing his throat nervously. He clearly knew he was walking into a massacre. "My client acknowledges the irregular nature of the corporate expenses in question. However, he respectfully submits that during the time period these funds were accessed, he and Mrs. Bennett Shaw were legally married. As such, he believed he was utilizing marital assets, not committing corporate fraud." Malcolm Price didn't even look up from his legal pad. He let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. "Counsel," Malcolm finally said, his voice terrifyingly calm and laced with absolute contempt. "Are you seriously attempting to argue that a $65,000 diamond engagement ring, purchased with forged corporate authorizations and given to a subordinate employee, constitutes a valid marital asset? Because if that is your defense, I will gladly pause this mediation and allow you to test that theory in front of a federal judge." The defense attorney swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We are simply stating that the lines between personal and corporate funds were blurred due to the nature of the family-owned business." "The lines were not blurred," Malcolm corrected him sharply, pulling a thick binder from his briefcase and slamming it onto the mahogany table. "They were explicitly defined in the corporate bylaws, which your client knowingly bypassed by forging the majority shareholder's digital signature 247 times. The board is not interested in your philosophical interpretation of marriage. The board wants its $3.2 million. Today," Malcolm opened the binder and slid a stack of financial documents across the table. "We have audited our client's remaining personal accounts," Malcolm stated, looking directly at Adrian. "The unvested equity has already been revoked. But we have located his personal savings, his 401k, the title to his 2023 Mercedes G-Wagon, the deed to the lakeside cabin in Vermont, and the collection of luxury watches he purchased over the last 5 years. The total liquidated value of these assets comes to approximately $1.8 million. Adrian's head snapped up. His eyes were wide with pure panic. You can't take my retirement accounts. You can't leave me with nothing. How am I supposed to pay my legal fees? How am I supposed to live? You left yourself with nothing, Adrian, I said, speaking for the first time. He looked at me, a sudden flash of the old, arrogant anger surfacing through his fear. Claire, please, you have Bennett family holdings. You have millions. You practically own the company. If you take everything I have left, I'll be completely bankrupt. How am I supposed to start over? You started over 18 months ago, I reminded him coldly, refusing to let him play the victim. When you told your CEO you were separated and leased a penthouse to prove it. You used my money to fund your exit strategy. You bought diamonds and private jets while I sat in Westport waiting for you to come home from board meetings. I am simply closing the account. Malcolm tapped the documents on the table. Sign the restitution agreement, Adrian, Malcolm ordered. You will surrender the $1.8 million in personal assets to the corporate treasury immediately. You will sign a promissory note for the remaining $1.4 million. If you refuse, I will terminate this mediation, and I will hand the entire unredacted forensic file to the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York before lunch. They are very eager to prosecute high-profile corporate fraud. Adrian stared at the papers. He looked at his lawyer, desperate for a legal loophole, a way out, a magical phrase that would save his fortune. His lawyer slowly shook his head, looking down at his notes. Sign it, Adrian. They have you dead to rights. If we go to trial, you will face decades in federal prison. With a trembling hand, Adrian picked up the pen. He signed the restitution agreement. He signed away his cars, his watches, his savings, his cabin, and his retirement. He signed his name over and over again, dismantling his entire fake empire with every stroke of the pen. When he finally put the pen down, the reality of his situation crushed him. The man who had stood on the atrium stage 3 months ago, proposing to a beautiful CEO and basking in the adoration of his employees, was now officially legally penniless. He stood up, buttoned his cheap suit, and walked out of the conference room without another word. The divorce was finalized quietly 4 weeks later. There was no battle over the Westport house. There was no argument over the corporate equity. The ironclad prenuptial agreement held firm, and the restitution agreement stripped Adrian of any leverage he might have possessed. He didn't even show up to the final hearing. As for Aureon Health Systems, the company did not collapse in the absence of its visionary founder. In fact, it stabilized and thrived. Following the conclusion of the ethics investigation, the board officially cleared Vanessa Moreau of any complicity in the fraud. She had fully cooperated with the forensic accountants, handing over her personal devices to prove she had never seen the forged authorizations. She was fully reinstated as Chief Executive Officer. And I, after 14 years of hiding in the shadows, officially stepped into the light. I accepted the position of Executive Chairwoman of the board. My first act was to call a company-wide town hall meeting in the very same atrium where Adrian had staged his fake engagement. I stood on the presentation platform. I wasn't wearing a dark trench coat, and I wasn't carrying roses. I was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, and I looked out over the 200 employees who had once cheered for a lie. Vanessa Moreau stood next to me. "Good morning," Vanessa said into the microphone, her voice steady and intensely professional. As you all know, the last 4 months have been a period of significant transition for Aureon. We have faced profound challenges regarding leadership and corporate integrity, but we did not weather this storm alone. Vanessa turned to me, offering a genuine, respectful smile. For the last 14 years, Vanessa continued, addressing the entire company. You have known the name of our founder, but many of you did not know the architect. The woman standing next to me wrote the core integration code that this company runs on. Her family provided the seed capital that kept the lights on during our first 3 years. She is the majority shareholder, and she is the reason Aureon still exists today. Vanessa stepped back, handing me the microphone. The atrium was completely silent. The employees stared at me, processing the massive shift in the corporate narrative. "Thank you, Vanessa," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the glass and steel room. "My name is Claire Bennett, and I am incredibly proud of what we have built here." I didn't mention Adrian. I didn't need to. His name had already been scrubbed from the building, from the website, and from the corporate history. He was entirely erased. Aureon was founded on the principle of transparency in healthcare data, I continued. But moving forward, we are also going to champion transparency in corporate leadership. Today, I am proud to announce the launch of the Aureon Women's Healthcare Tech Fund, a $20 million initiative dedicated exclusively to funding underrepresented female founders in the medical technology sector. We are going to ensure that the women building the future of this industry never have to stand in the shadows of someone else's ego. The atrium erupted in applause. It wasn't the manufactured, confetti-fueled cheering of a fake Valentine's Day proposal. It was genuine, profound respect. Vanessa and I had become a formidable, unstoppable team. Two women who had survived the destruction of the same man, now running the empire he thought he owned. 8 months later, I was sitting at my massive mahogany desk in the executive suite, reviewing the quarterly earnings report, when my assistant walked in and placed a single, handwritten envelope on my desk. There was no return address. The postmark was from a small town in Vermont. I recognized the handwriting immediately. I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of lined notebook paper. "Claire T." the letter began. "I don't expect you to reply to this. I just needed to write it. I live in Vermont now. I work as a mid-level project manager at a small logistics software company. I share a cubicle. I drive a used Honda. Nobody here knows my name, and nobody cares what my title used to be. Last week, my manager took credit for a presentation I spent 3 weeks building. I sat in the meeting, watching him accept the praise from the regional director, and I couldn't say a word, because he controls my performance review. He smiled, shook the director's hand, and acted like he had done all the work. I just sat there, invisible. "I finally understand what I did to you. I took your genius, your money, and your quiet loyalty, and I wore them like a suit. I convinced myself that because I was the one doing the talking, I was the one doing the work. I was so blinded by my own reflection that I didn't realize you were the one holding the mirror. I am not a visionary founder. I never was. I was just an employee who got incredibly, undeservedly lucky to have married you. Asterisk, I am sorry, Claire, not because I lost the company, not because I lost the money. I am sorry because I lost the only person who ever truly saw my potential, and I traded her for the sound of people clapping. Adrian." I read the letter twice. There were no demands. There were no hidden threats. No requests for financial help. No subtle attempts to manipulate his way back into my life. It was just the devastating, pathetic truth of a man who had finally hit the absolute bottom of his own ego. He had been forced to experience the exact erasure he had inflicted on me. I didn't feel a rush of triumphant vindication. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of closure. I folded the letter, placed it in a file folder labeled Personal Archives, and put it in the bottom drawer of my desk. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Later that evening, I was packing my briefcase to leave the office when I opened a small side compartment and found the cream-colored envelope from Valentine's Day. I pulled out the 2 first-class tickets to Paris. I looked at them. I thought about the 14 years I had spent sacrificing my own desires, my own recognition, and my own voice to support a man who eventually tried to erase me. I thought about the lie I had told myself, that hiding my power was the best way to keep my family safe. I didn't throw the tickets away. I logged on to the airline's website. I canceled Adrian's ticket. A week later, I was walking along the Seine in Paris. The air was crisp, the city was beautiful, and the weight of the last decade had completely lifted from my shoulders. I stopped on the Pont des Arts, looking out over the water as the sun began to set behind the Eiffel Tower. I hadn't destroyed Aureon Health Systems to get revenge. I had saved it. I had removed a toxic, fraudulent liability from the company I loved, and in doing so, I had finally reclaimed my own identity. I pulled my phone from my pocket and typed a single, permanent note to myself, a reminder of the hardest lesson I had ever learned. Never confuse being needed with being valued. Adrian had needed my father's money. He had needed my code. He had needed my silent support to build his fake identity. But he had never valued me. I put my phone away and smiled, breathing in the cold Paris air. I was 43 years old. I owned an empire. I was the executive chairwoman of a revolutionary tech company. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing behind anyone. So tell me honestly, if your partner used your money and your silence to build a fake empire, and then humiliated you in public, would you burn the company to the ground to destroy them? Or would you quietly revoke their access, take your empire back, and let them realize they were never the owner? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one.